Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next lesson. Lesson 7, going over the human culture and impact and interrelationship within the different populations of the United States and Canada. So let's get started. First, we got to look at the native populations. So first, we'll look at the native populations of the United States. Remember, the United States became a country in 1776. And of course, we are still a country today. But before 1776, there was a large group of people who lived here before European colonization. The major peoples that lived here we call them Native Americans or the Native Indians. They lived here for many, many, many years before European colonization. Now, the Indians or the Native Americans are a vast, diverse group of people. There are Cherokee and Choctaw and Chippewa. There are Apache and Comanche. There are Inuit, Michigamme. There's different types of Native American groups. Many of those different Native American groups have different languages, different religious systems, different community organizations, different ways of living. It is a very diverse group. It is not one general culture. It is a diverse set of cultures. There's different types of Indians that live on the East Coast, that lived on the Southeast Coast, that lived in the Southwest, that lived in the Great Plains, and that lived way out west in California and the coastline over there. A diverse range of peoples. Now, during colonization, colonizing nations came over from Europe and took over the land that was possessed by the Native Americans. Now, those Native Americans pretty much fought wars with those colonizing nations from around 1500 to the late 1800s. A good 300, 400 years of fighting to preserve, protect, and to maintain their territory. However, it was slowly taken away from them. In the United States, over the centuries, especially in the 1800s, they created different reservations where Native Americans can live and practice their own way of life in their own way. There are many Native Americans still around today. However, due to the wars and the plagues and the disease, more than 90% of the original Native Americans in the United States are pretty much gone. But there's a large amount that still exists today. Around 1 or 2% of the American population is Native American. They've mixed into the population deeply, and they still play a role in our society. Next, we get migration. This migration comes from many different ways. Migration from Europe pretty much begins around the 15 and 1600s. That first initial colonization when it comes to the United States is coming from the United Kingdom. So England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, those nations, especially colonizing along the East Coast. Then around 1619, they start bringing in enslaved Africans. So you get the Black culture being brought in to the United States because of slavery. So the thing is, when it comes to migration, migration is in waves. It didn't all happen just all at once. So the first wave is British European migration. Next wave that's kind of going alongside the British European migration is the enslaved African migration. Then the next wave is migration due to industrialization. Remember, the United States goes through increasing factories and things like that all across the East and going across the West. So those migrations from Eastern Europe, such as like the Italians, French, Germans, other European nations start coming over. You also get like the Chinese who start coming over, building the railroads. You get different waves of migration coming in. Those different ways of migration then influence our culture. Then in the late 1920s, we get more migration from Eastern Europe because of either different persecutions or changes in politics across the world, and you get even more migration from there. Then now in the 20th century, we're getting, well, the 20th and the 21st century, we're getting migration from Latin America, from Mexico, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Venezuela. We're getting migration from the Caribbean. These migration waves are, again, because of changes in the politics of those nations. They want to come to the United States because life is better over here, so they want a better life for themselves. But this causes a lot of issues because there's illegal migration, because the United States is a coalesced country now, so there's many difficulties in regards to how to handle a new wave of immigrants each and every year, each and every presidential administration. Next, we get cities of the United States. If we're looking at cities in the United States, our major cities, our major urban areas are New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, those places. Now, if you notice, our large urban areas are close to bodies of water. New York is right next to the Atlantic Ocean. New York, that's my home city. So whoop whoop. If you look at Chicago, Chicago's right next to the Great Lakes. If you look at Los Angeles, Los Angeles is right next to the Pacific Ocean. And then Houston is right next to the Gulf of Mexico. One of the reasons why these cities are so large is one, they're right next to the water. So it's a lot of, they're pretty much the entry ports for a lot of our resources. So any resources that are coming from around the world is coming through there. So not only resources, but people from Asia, Europe, Africa, and the other parts of the Americas are coming in through those major ports in New York, in Houston, in Los Angeles, in Chicago. That's where they're going. So these major cities play a role. New York has millions of people. Los Angeles has millions. And Chicago has millions. Houston has millions. These cities are gigantic and they are very diverse. They have very wide range of people groups. They make up the major culture of America. So if you want to know American culture and the culture of other nations around the world at the same time, you go to these major cities. All right, moving on to Canada's migration situation. Canada's migration situation is very similar to the United States, but slightly different. Canada's migration situation, pretty much European, especially British migration. However, Canada is different because originally it was the French who started doing controlling Canada. So Canada has a very French and British influence. So the French and British constantly would fight over these territories and have a constant conflict over them. So French and British situation there. But eventually, because of different wars that happened, the British pretty much take over and control most of Canada. Canada, at the same time, does still deal with the French that still live there. So you'll have French parts of Canada like Quebec or Montreal. You'll have those places, but those places are centered in French, while the other parts of Canada are centered in English. You also get waves of migration, similar to America, from Europe and Eastern Europe because of different political difficulties in those regions of the world. They go to those places because, they go to Canada because Canada is usually open to migration. And then Canada experiences a slightly different type of migration when it comes to the United States. The United States, in the modern era, is experiencing migration, especially from Latin America. Not so much with Canada because they're kind of far away. Canada is also experiencing migration from those old French colonies in the Caribbean. They're experiencing immigration, sorry, immigration from Asia and Africa. Now, Canada also has a native population. They pretty much experienced a similar situation as the United States. Again, French and British coming in. However, the French treated the Native Americans a lot better. French treated Native Americans a lot better, mostly because the French were trying to convert the natives. So when the French were trying to convert the natives, they were trying to be nice, like, hey, we want to convert you to Christianity. So it'll be nice. So they weren't as abusive as the British when it came to natives. But then British came over and became a lot more aggressive, more controlling. As time moved on, they experienced same difficulties fighting for their land rights and difficulties like disease. However, the Native Americans, or they call them in Canada the indigenous peoples, the indigenous peoples have a larger swath of land because Canada, again, has a lower population than the United States and takes up less space. So the indigenous people have a large swath of land that is theirs. All the major large land masses in the northern parts of Canada are pretty much controlled by the native population. So the native population, in many ways, have been preserved in Canada. Then we get into Canada's cities. Canada's cities, they got Montreal, they got Vancouver, they got Toronto. Those cities are large cities that occupy a very important place in Canadian hearts. These cities central to Canada. Toronto in that kind of eastern side. Toronto and Montreal on the eastern side. Vancouver is on that far west side by Seattle. So they experience different climates, but the major thing is one, by a large body of water. Toronto's by one of those Great Lakes. So is Montreal. Vancouver's right by the Pacific. Nearby bodies of water and very familiar to the populations of the world. Large cities attract diversity, and large cities are always nearby water. That's one major thing you should understand. Alrighty, that is it for lesson 7. I'll catch you guys later.